The first ray of morning light filtered through Emma's bedroom window, but she had been awake for hours. Tears stained her pillow, fear gripped her heart, and only one question echoed in her mind: what will become of my life? Today was her wedding day. At 19, when her dreams were filled with college acceptance letters and building her own future, her father had made a decision that shattered everything. She would marry James Callahan, the wealthiest and most intimidating businessman in their small Montana town. Just hearing James's name made people nervous. He was 40 years old, with a stern face and a commanding voice that didn't ask, it demanded. Emma's mother helped her into the wedding dress, tears streaming down both their faces. "Sweetheart, sometimes life doesn't give us choices. A woman has to accept her destiny." But rebellion burned in Emma's heart, mixed with terror and a helpless desperation. She had begged her father, cried until she couldn't breathe, pleaded on her knees, but the crushing weight of medical debt from her brother's cancer treatment and the pressure from their tight-knit community had buried all her wishes alive. The wedding reception was filled with guests celebrating, but Emma's heart felt like stone. When James first looked at her, there was no warmth in his steel-gray eyes, only possession, only ownership. When the minister asked for her vows, Emma whispered, "I do," so quietly that people in the back rows couldn't hear, but her heart screamed, "I don't," with every fiber of her being. That night, when she entered James's massive ranch house on the outskirts of town, she felt like she was walking into a prison. The ceilings were high, the rooms were cold, and James's silence was terrifying. On their first night, James showed her to a bedroom and said flatly, "This is your room. When I need you, I'll call for you." Then he walked away, his boots echoing on the hardwood floors. Emma cried herself to sleep that night, thinking of her mother, her abandoned college applications, and the art scholarship she'd won but would never use. The next morning, when she ventured into the kitchen, an elderly housekeeper named Margaret pulled her aside and whispered, "Child, living here won't be easy. Mr. Callahan is a hard man. Don't make mistakes." The warning sent ice through Emma's veins. During the first week, Emma barely spoke to James. She woke early, tried to stay busy with household tasks she didn't know how to do, and retreated to her room whenever possible. James didn't talk much either. He only gave orders: dinner at 6, coffee, black, stay out of my office. Emma felt less like a wife and more like an employee, or worse, like property he'd acquired. She had become invisible in her own life. The ranch was isolated, surrounded by miles of Montana wilderness. Emma felt cut off from everything she'd known, her friends, her family, her dreams of studying art in Seattle. Sometimes she'd stand at the window and watch James working with the ranch hands, his movements efficient and cold. She wondered if he even remembered she existed when she wasn't in his sight. Months crawled by, and Emma's life became a nightmare of routine. Every morning she woke up dreading James's mood. One day she accidentally used salt instead of sugar in his coffee. James threw the mug against the wall, where it shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Can't you do anything right?" he shouted. Emma froze, trembling, and ran from the room without cleaning up the mess. That night she lay in bed thinking, "Is this my entire future? Will I ever be happy again?" But then small, confusing things began to happen. One morning Emma woke up with a terrible flu, fever, chills, unable to get out of bed. She expected to be left alone to suffer, but James personally called the town doctor, had medications delivered from the pharmacy 30 miles away, and ordered Margaret to check on her every 2 hours. When Emma tried to thank him, he just nodded curtly and left. No warmth, but no cruelty either. It confused her. Another incident happened when Emma's mother called crying. Her younger brother needed another surgery, and the family couldn't afford it. Emma was desperate but terrified to ask James for anything. Finally, she gathered every ounce of courage and approached him in his office. "My brother needs surgery. Could I possibly go visit my family?" James looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "The truck's ready. Go," he said. But that wasn't all. He paid for her brother's entire surgery, every single bill. Emma was stunned. Why would this harsh man do something so generous? Around town, rumors swirled that James Callahan was ruthless in business, that he destroyed competitors and fired workers without mercy. But Emma started noticing contradictions. He paid his ranch hands the highest wages in the county. She found receipts showing anonymous donations to the Children's Hospital in Billings. One day she discovered he'd been secretly funding scholarships for kids whose parents worked on the ranch. When she asked him about it, James said simply, "I know what it's like to have nothing." For the first time, Emma heard pain in his voice beneath the hardness. Slowly, gradually, Emma's fear began to ease. James was stern, demanding, hard as granite, but he wasn't cruel. He was silent, but not heartless. One evening, Emma found the courage to ask, "Why did you marry me?" James took a long breath, staring out the window at the sunset over the mountains. "Your father came to me desperate. Your brother's medical bills were destroying your family. I paid everything off. The marriage was his condition, not mine. I didn't want a wife, but I thought, maybe I could have something like a family." Emma felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. This wasn't James's manipulation, it was her father's desperation. She began to see James differently. Yes, he was difficult and demanding, but he was also deeply wounded. Margaret eventually told her the story. James had grown up in poverty, put himself through college working 3 jobs, built his business from nothing, and lost his parents in a car accident right before he made his first million. "He never learned how to let people in," Margaret said sadly. "He only knows how to protect and provide, not how to love." Emma realized James had built walls so high around his heart that he trapped himself inside. 6 months into the marriage, James had never given Emma a wedding gift. Then one evening he said, "Tomorrow night there's an event at the town hall. You're coming with me." Emma was shocked. James never took her anywhere public. The next evening, when they arrived at the hall, the entire town seemed to be there. Emma's heart pounded. What was happening? James walked onto the stage, took the microphone, and said, "Tonight I want to give my wife Emma a wedding gift." The room fell completely silent. Every eye was on them. James continued, his voice steady but emotional. "6 months ago, I married a young woman who had dreams, real dreams of her own. Circumstances forced her into a life she didn't choose. Tonight, I'm giving her back her dreams." He pulled out an envelope and walked over to Emma, handing it to her with hands that actually trembled slightly. Emma's fingers shook as she opened it. Inside was an acceptance letter to the Seattle Art Institute, along with documentation showing full tuition paid for 4 years, plus living expenses. Emma's eyes flooded with tears. James turned back to the microphone. Emma wanted to study art. She wanted to become an artist, to create, to be free. "I didn't give her a choice about marrying me." Well, technically her father didn't. "But I'm giving her a choice now. She can stay here, or she can go to Seattle and follow her dreams. I won't stop her. I won't hold her back." The hall erupted in applause, people standing, some crying. Was this really James Callahan, the man they'd thought was made of ice? But James wasn't finished. "And I'm announcing the establishment of the Montana Dreams Foundation. I'm personally funding full college scholarships for 10 young women from our county each year, women whose families can't afford to send them to college, women who shouldn't have to give up their futures because of circumstances beyond their control." The applause grew louder. Emma couldn't stop crying. She finally understood. James's hardness came from his pain, and his silence had been hiding the most generous heart she'd ever known. After the event, in the truck driving home under the vast Montana sky, Emma held James's hand for the first time. "Why did you do all this?" she asked. James looked at her, and for the first time, she saw him smile, really smile. "Because I lost my dreams once. I had to give up college when my parents got sick. I worked ranches for 15 years before I could start my business. I didn't want you to lose your dreams too." And I realized something: keeping you here against your will wasn't building a marriage. It was building a prison for both of us. That night, Emma saw James as fully human for the first time, a broken man trying to keep others from breaking. Emma faced the hardest decision of her life. She could take James's gift, go to Seattle, and finally live the life she dreamed of. Or she could stay in Montana with a man she was just beginning to understand. After days of thinking, she made her choice: she would go to Seattle, but only part-time. She'd study through a hybrid program that let her spend half the year in the city learning her craft and half the year on the ranch. When Emma started classes, James made sure she had everything: art supplies, a studio apartment near campus, a reliable car. Every time she left for Seattle, he'd say, "Make something beautiful. I'm proud of you." And every time she returned to the ranch, his face would light up in a way that transformed him. Slowly, something new began growing in Emma's heart. It wasn't the fear she'd felt at first, it was respect, gratitude, and then something deeper. Time passed, and Emma watched James continue to change. He talked more, smiled more, asked for her opinion on ranch decisions and business matters. One evening he said, "I was wrong about everything. I thought marriage was a transaction, a practical arrangement. You taught me it's supposed to be a partnership built on respect." Emma could hardly believe this was the same man who terrified her on their wedding night. 2 years later, when Emma had her first art exhibition in Billings, James sat in the front row, wearing an actual suit instead of his usual ranch clothes, his eyes shining with pride. Her paintings, powerful images of Montana landscapes mixed with portraits of ranch life, sold out completely. The local newspaper ran a feature story, "From Arranged Marriage to Artistic Freedom, the Callahan Story." Emma realized that love didn't always start with romance. Sometimes it grew from hardship, from respect earned, from two broken people helping each other heal. 3 years after their wedding, Emma graduated from the Seattle Art Institute with honors. James was there, in the audience, tears streaming down his face, something she'd never thought she'd see. That day, Emma understood that James hadn't given her love at first, he'd given her something more important: freedom. And that freedom had become the foundation for real love to grow. James hadn't tried to own her or control her. He'd set her free, and in that freedom, she'd chosen to come back to him. Today, Emma is a successful artist with a gallery in Billings and her work displayed across the western United States. James is her biggest supporter, often serving as her model and helping transport her large canvases. Together, they've opened a community center in their town where young people can take free art and music classes. The Montana Dreams Foundation has sent over 60 young women to college. People no longer see James Callahan as just a tough businessman, they see a man who was transformed by doing the right thing, even when it was hard. Emma knows her marriage started wrong, forced by circumstances, born from desperation. But she also knows that some of the most beautiful things grow from broken soil. James didn't give her poetry or flowers or romance. He gave her back herself, her dreams, her freedom, her future. And that turned out to be the greatest love story of all. This story teaches us that life isn't always fair, and circumstances sometimes force us into situations we never chose. But kindness, respect, and selflessness can heal even the deepest wounds. Real love isn't about possession, it's about liberation. It's about seeing someone else's potential and having the courage to help them reach it, even if it means letting them go. James and Emma proved that second chances exist, that people can change, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is giving someone their freedom. Today, their foundation continues changing lives, proving that one act of genuine kindness can ripple outward and transform an entire community.